What kind of treat? Candy?
So I am a stickler for wanting to start reasonably on time, and it's 6:31, and we wanted to start the panel at 6:30. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in. I know a few others in the back are still getting their plate and hopefully wine, beer, cider, water, Coke, Sprite, whatever. But tonight we're going to be running through the secret to retaining your high performers, something I'm particularly interested in. I recently moved into a position here at Namely. So I'm the VP of East Coast Sales here at Namely. And we'll talk later about what Namely is. But I'm running a group of about 20 to 25 people, many of which thankfully are high performers. But at the same time, as many of you in the audience know, if you have high performers, there's always the risk of them heading off to the sunset to go to something different. So I'm going to be listening very attentively to what I need to do to retain all of them. So along those lines, the agenda for tonight, I don't have the thing in my hand. Oh, there we go. Somebody else does. So the agenda for the night, we've already made our way through a good chunk of it. We finished the registration, drinks, and appetizers. In case anybody missed that, we're going to do that again at the end. We've sort of bookended it with drinks and appetizers again at the end. As I mentioned, we're going to jump shortly into the panel over the next sort of 30 minutes or so. And of course, at the end of that, we're going to have a Q&A session for about 15 minutes. Now, to make it really easy for everyone, if you haven't used it before, we're going to be using Slido today to drive the Q&A. So if you have a smartphone, which hopefully most do, it's 2018, almost 2019, you can jump on your phone and go to slido.com, enter in that code right there, which we will leave up throughout the panel. And you can actually ask questions in real time, which you can then either upvote or I think you can downvote, but maybe don't downvote, that'd be kind of weird. But upvote the questions that seem most interesting, which will drive the conversation following the panel and get our Q&A started at the end there. So as you're thinking of questions throughout the panel, remember to jump on Slido, ask away, and of course we can open up to live questions at the end. So in terms of our panel today, and I'll turn things over shortly in a minute here, but Meredith Haberfeld will be moderating our panel. She is the CEO of Think Human. Participating in our panel tonight is Julie Lee, who's my Senior Director of People Operations, Ryan Sandler, who's the co-founder and CEO of TrueWork, and then Kristen Neville Manning, who is the VP of People Operations and Facilities at Teachers Pay Teachers. And IT, wearing many hats. So I'll turn things over to Meredith here, and I'll sit down and be quiet. As you know, salespeople talk a lot, and I'll leave it to the moderator in the panel to go from here.
All right, thank you so much, Kevin. All right. So welcome, everybody. We're so happy that you're here, but we're lonely in the front. We're really lonely. We need you to move up. Even if you need to go to the bathroom or get more food later, we won't be offended. We just want you to come to the front, please. Anyone? All right, the invitation remains open. We really want you up here in the sofas. All right, thank you. So, you. We love you. Thank you. The more the merrier. Okay, so over the next, there's more coming. We love you. It feels so good. Thank you. All right, so we are so happy that you're here. And over the next 45 minutes, we have this incredible panel of experts that are going to be answering your questions. So as Kevin said, it's really important that you get onto slido.com and upload or enter your questions, or this is going to be a much more boring conversation for you and for all of us. So please get in the conversation. They are going to be taking your conversation. So as a starting point, for context for this conversation about building high retention cultures and cultures that are retaining, in particular, your top performers, a statistic. I think it's staggering. It may not be surprising for any of you, but it is nevertheless a really big number. Every single month, the combined populations of Wyoming, Alaska, Vermont, and North Dakota are handing in their resignations every single month. That's a lot of people, right? Yikes. And among millennials, which is the largest generation in the workforce at this time, at any given moment, 6 in 10 looking for work in a new company. Big numbers that we're talking about. So this not only drains the knowledge and talent out of our organizations, but it's really expensive and has a meaningful impact on the bottom line. There's the cost of recruiting, the time it takes to bring in the right person, the learning curve to get them up to speed, the work that's not getting done, or the burden that it is on others. And I imagine everybody in this room has heard some version of the statistic that it takes anywhere from 1.5 to 5 times a person's annual salary to replace them. So it's a painful and meaningful thing to a business. It's not just some soft conversation that we're talking about, right? So needless to say, no shocker, companies are spending a lot of money trying to stem this tide. According to Josh Berson's research, in the last few years, US businesses have spent $4 billion on retention efforts. That's a lot of money. $4 billion, what's that spend going toward? Well, it's going toward things like wellness programs and organic food and great snacks and beautiful office space and kombucha. And I don't know about you, but I love it when I go to an office that has those things, right? Makes me really happy. And what's the impact of that $4 billion spend, other than on my happiness and maybe yours? What's the impact on retention? Anybody know? Yes, everybody knows the answer. Dun, 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 dun. A whopping 0, nothing. Wah, wah, wah. $4 billion later, and attrition's going the wrong way. It's on the rise. And yet, high retention, in spite of that staggering statistic, it isn't a fantasy because some companies are somehow nailing it. Right? So we have this incredible panel here to talk about how companies that are really finding some of these key ingredients where they're not only able to retain their high performers, but attract the best people. And typically what goes along with that package is higher performance and profitability than their peers. So as Kevin said, we have Julie, Senior Director of People from Namely, who is here to take your questions. Namely, in case you don't know, hypergrowth company with 4,000% growth over the last 3 years. So they know something about how to handle the people function to accommodate that really beautifully. Kirsten on the end, VP of People and IT and, was it facilities? Yeah. Yep, okay, I got it. At Teachers Pay Teachers. And in case you didn't check before you came, their Glassdoor scores off the hook. Like you don't see it like this. You should, it's actually worth just going to check just to see what they're doing there. So really incredible. And then Ryan, co-founder and CEO of TrueWork, once again, off the hook Glassdoor scores. So we have this incredible panel here to take your questions. Please get your questions into Slido so that you can get into the conversation, and let's get this party started. So let's start big picture. From your own, and this is for all 3 of you, from your own lived experience, high retention of your top performers comes from what? And Kirsten, let's start with you.
I think it comes from a great manager and great relationship with that manager. Because the bottom line, that's the person that can help open doors for you, can give you projects, can actually understand what your interests are, where you have natural conversations around that. I think the infrastructure of what my team, People Ops, can provide and is super helpful in facilitating that, but it's not the thing that does it. I also believe that the executives have to provide a company with a mission and money for a company and lots of other things, a vision, but that also isn't going to drive the day-to-day. So I really believe that. I've been debating this a lot. Some people I know don't believe it's the manager, but I definitely do.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kirsten. Let's go for you, Julie, and then we'll come back to you, Ryan.
Can I just say ditto to that? I mean, 100% agree, manager is so important, but also a place where people can feel very challenged, I think is also equally important, especially when we're thinking about, I think managers are critical to retention of anyone, right? But if you're thinking specifically just on your high performers, employees, I think that challenge is often what people are looking for. So they're folks who really like what they do. They kind of get into their groove and they want to excel. So they often have really great ideas. They have a lot of passion for their work, and they want to be able to feel like they're making a big difference. So they also want to solve really interesting problems. I know a lot of engineers come to Namely because they think the HR space is actually quite complicated. It's a lot more complex than some consumer, facing apps. So they come to namely because of this big complex challenge. So I think being able to offer continuous challenges in a positive way is really helpful to retention of top performers as well.
Yeah, and definitely resounding both of those. I think the only thing to add there, what we really believe is the most important part of retaining employees is career and personal growth. And so we from day one lay out some people call it a tour of duty, or just kind of mutual plan of what this employee is trying to get out of the next 2, 4, 10 years, whether it's growth within that function, growing into another function, and empowering managers to be really selfless in how they think about that employee's growth and their direct reports growth. Sometimes it's going to hurt their own team and their own roadmap for that employee to go into a different function. They're going to have to hire a backfill, but it's going to keep that employee around at the company. And so encouraging your managers to think selflessly about how they're encouraging growth amongst their direct reports is one of the most high leverage thing we found to keep employees around.
Awesome. So thematically, managers, and specifically being personalized, not like a one size fits all approach, but really having the manager tap into, for each person, what is going to keep them challenged and at their learning edge, and then keeping them unblocked, because the more they have that runway to run, the more excited and inspired they can be. Okay, great. So, oh yeah, please, Kirsten.
I would just say, how many people here are managers? Okay, so it's like half. So the rest of us, well, I guess all of us are managed by someone. So even if you're a manager, the other thing I'd just add, it's the manager-employee relationship, and that's two people. So make sure, whoever you are, that you're actually communicating to your manager what it is you want for growth, what it is you don't like, because the more candor you can get in that relationship, and I think earlier, like Ryan's company is doing, the better, because then you can really navigate together. So I just wanted to add it so much as about there's two sides to that relationship. Just want to make sure that's super clear.
Kirsten, I love to hear your accent every time you talk. Makes me happy. And I love what you're saying about the two-way direction or bidirectionality of that relationship. And the manager has to elicit it, but people have to step up and really offer what that is. So now let's look at this from a different angle. Sometimes we look at just what do we need to do to get higher attention, and we can miss what are the things that are undermining it, like the hole in the bucket. And or I think sometimes about a garden, that we're doing all these things like water and sun and plant food, but missing the little bugs that are eating it. So let's look at that as it relates to attrition. For any of you that have observed or worked in a high attrition environment, what were the key causes? Let's start with you, Julie.
I think number one is knowing your numbers. That's super important. A lot of times, for HR professionals, we're very focused on the relationship building. We know our managers, we do a lot of training, we do a lot of this work to boost morale and engagement, et cetera. But we may not be as focused as we should be on the metrics. So number one, quite frankly, is, and I feel like I'm circumventing the point of the question, but I think knowing what your attrition metrics are is so important, and drilling into that, right? So understanding where, if you have different offices, which office do you really need to focus on? If you have different departments, which department are you focusing on? What about people of different tenures? Is it the 0 to 6 month? Is it a 2 to 3 year tenure? Really understanding where that is helps you pinpoint where you're seeing some issues around attrition. I think that's sometimes not looked at as much as it should be. So we're doing these blanket initiatives that may not really be targeting the true cause of the attrition. So I can't tell you, as a whole, everyone should be focused on X, Y, and Z. But if you look at that for your company, that can help you pinpoint the areas where you really need to focus on.
Great. So having the data and analytics and having your hands really in it, so you can diagnose accurately and know where to focus. Anything either of you want to add about what the key causes of bad attrition are?
Yeah, sure. Just some observations I've seen from peers companies who have faced problems with high attrition. I think one of the biggest causes we see is lack of transparency. I think kind of touched on it, Julie, but employees not understanding where the company's headed. They start having a lot of big questions because they see their peers leaving or they see major changes, and the executive team is just really not being transparent about what the next 12 months are going to look like. Companies not being transparent about how much employee stock is worth. right? Things as simple as that are starting to become red flags for employees who start want to look elsewhere. And then, there's other, I think some surprising things that people don't think about necessarily that, can become really big red flags for top performers. I mean, one of them is as simple as favoritism, lack of meritocracy. You see a manager who consistently gets negative feedback, but is protected because they're friends with an executive or friends with a co-founder. And for top performers who might be reporting to that manager, I mean, it's the most frustrating thing. And so that could be a huge cause of attrition as well.
I think those are, Kirsten, please.
No, that's go for it. Okay. I was going to say actually related, but it's not dealing with underperformers. It's something that I'd often say is a flag, because I think if you're a high performer, you want to be around other people that are similarly motivated. And there is, at least for me, it's kind of demoralizing when you see somebody sort of skid in at 11 and then leave at 4 and they're like, oh, I'm having such a hard day. And I'm like, really? So I would say that's one of the things that I think is often not looked at. And similarly, and I've worked on this, and I wouldn't actually say my attrition is always perfect in the orgs that I've been in, but one of the other things is not managing out those people. Like sometimes they attrit because they quit, because they're kind of fed up, versus actually managing them out. So looking at sort of the different types of attrition that you've got at a company, back to the data question, and going back to managers and being like, you didn't let this person go or put them on a plan and weren't clear with them. And now you're saying you don't want to save them at the end, but that's kind of rotten for the person and really rotten for the organization. So just a couple of things I'd say look out for.
Yeah. I think that idea of sometimes in the effort to build a really happy, thriving culture, we're like, yay, we want everybody to feel really good, and can miss that hard conversations are needed to have people feel really good. And that if you miss the hard conversations and the performance conversations, you have energy drainers. So great point, and thank you.
Can I add to that one little bit,
sure.
Meredith? Cannot agree more with what Kirsten mentioned, and also managing up poor performers, but also people who are not a culture fit for your company or a values fit for your company. So what we often see is when we're thinking about high performers, right? Are they high performers because they're meeting their sales targets or exceeding them, or is it something very metrics based? But are they also behaving in a way that is really exemplary of what you want to demonstrate as a company? And I think that sometimes also creates some negativity, right? And that can spread really fast. Because if you see someone who is doing their job well in one respect, but at the same time is doing it in a way that's not collaborative or not in a way that's really in the norm for your company, that can eventually spread as well. Because people will look at that person as a model and say, hey, that's really tolerated here. Like, that's okay. That's what you need to do to get ahead. And even though for, maybe some of the metrics, that's the right person, but really if you're thinking about retention and growing a company that's going to be long-term successful, those individuals, I think, also need to be thought about very, very carefully.
All right, you guys are, thank you. And you guys are doing such a good job getting your questions in here. Very exciting to see your questions like filling up the list here. One of the questions that's related to your data question is what actually are good and bad attrition rates? So obviously that's going to vary by industry, but any of you want to take a stab at what good or bad can sound like?
I can take a stab. We actually have a benchmarking report, namely has that, that we're rolling out to clients in 2019. So FYI, if you're a client, you'll be getting that soon. But basically based on our benchmarks, the upper 20s are actually our rolling 12 months attrition rate of about 27-ish, 27 to 30 is very common in the tech space of about 100 to 500 employees. I came from a financial services background, so that number was very high to me when I first looked at it, because I was used to like 10 to 12% a year. So when I thought, wow, that's really, really high. Like people are just going out the door. But as I come to learn more about tech and just startups in general, I realized that companies evolve so quickly, right? And there's people that really like being at a stage, earlier stage company, and that may not want to be at the same company anymore once they're a little bit more mature. So there is a lot more churn, I would say, generally speaking. But in terms of numbers, the upper 20s is actually very, very common.
I don't have their data, so I'm looking forward to the 2019 report as a consumer of Namely, but I would have thought I think the last tech average I'd seen was around 2021, but it could be a very much broader set of tech companies as sort of average. The one thing I would say too, I think on what's good or bad attrition, I think as an organization, it's any of the stuff you have to really think about. So what do you want your org to be known for? Do you want it to be sort of new, fresh people and helping people sort of have short stints and you're comfortable with that? Do you want it to be long-term? Where's your company in 4 years from now? That should help you decide actively what you want to work at for your attrition rate. So for my company, we have an attrition rate we're sort of aiming for. We're not always there. So I just want to say we're not perfect on this, but at least we have a sort of goal and an idea in mind for what we want to be known as. And I think it is considering costs, growth, just sort of different things that are happening. But I look forward to 2019.
All right, let's talk about hiring for a minute. How important is hiring from your point of view to retaining your high performers, and why?
So hiring's my passion. If you were to ask me my number one HR skill, I would say it's recruiting, and what I've done for years now. And for me, I think, and I said this to somebody earlier today, but I think the most important retention decision you make is your first date with a candidate. So all of us have probably dated in our lives, just even not being candidates. And if somebody sits down with you and the first drink that glass of wine with you, they're like, I don't really like commitment, I don't really want kids, blah, blah, blah. And then later on in the dating of them, you decide to date them anyway, even though you might want those things, commitment, monogamous and kids. And then 6 months later, you're like, oh, they don't want that anymore. Or you get married and they're like, I don't want kids. And actually, I want to have multiple partners. You're like, what? But they told you it on the first date. So I think recruiting's the same. I think the first phone call, people tell you really what they want, like on the whole, because they're sort of, you don't know them. It's sort of a little bit awkward. You don't have, I think your guard's really down. You really have to listen. And that to me is the most important part of the attrition to some degree, because you're like, do they actually, so I used to work at 2 big companies, Google and Facebook. And when I ran recruiting at Facebook, and they're like, people sometimes just wanted to come because of the brand, not because they actually liked the job, the manager, the team, or anything. And you had to listen for that, because in the end of the day, you've got the job, the mission, and the team. And as much as other things are sexy, and there's lots of great things at the companies I've worked at, they're not the things that are really going to keep you every day. And so I would say it's that initial conversation, like, who are they? What do they want? And being honest with them. Sometimes I turn people away and say, look, you actually won't love it here, where it's crazy hyper growth. There's no quiet. There's no system. Like, it's just a bit of madness, and you don't want that. You want stability and structure, and you should go like to another company, and that's okay. So that's what I would say.
Great. So knowing who you are as an organization and telling the truth about that, and then listening to who they are and making sure it's really a match, and that you believe they are going to be happy here, not just that they're great talent and you want them. Is there something you wanted to add to that, Ryan?
Yeah, no, I think exactly, like, creating, that alignment early on in the recruiting process of, like you said, exactly what you want to do, so that when you start your first day, it's not a surprise of what that employee's goals are. Super transparent and upfront about that during the recruiting process, so you know whether they're going to fit or not, but also to help you better prepare for onboarding them and making sure that they're performing best once they start the job. So
beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, now we have some manager questions. Okay, so we started out managers. They're super important to, as far as all 3 of you are concerned, to high performance, retaining your high performing people. What skills do you need to hire and train managers in order to create that kind of environment where you're going to hold on to your best people? Can you start, Joanne?
One of the things that we do at Namely for all our managers is coaching certification. So we think coaching is a very core skill of managers. Some people think a manager, I delegate work, that's kind of my primary job, but it's definitely part of the role. But the coaching piece, the listening, the asking questions, right? Really getting people to become more self-aware and to pull the best out of them is so, so critical. So yeah, namely we do manager coaching certification for everyone because that to us is a really core skill. Because once you have that, then you build a relationship. You have really productive conversations and you get other people to talk. You don't want your one-on-one to be like a one-way manager directing employee, right? You want to pull them to get the best answers, to get the best questions, to talk about what they want to do and what's challenging them, et cetera. So to us, that's the core.
Fantastic. Anything you guys want to add?
Yeah, I'd say, humility, accountability, things we look for in our culture of managers. Kind of some of the points earlier, but I mean, you're gonna have to make a lot of humble decisions as a manager. And it's hard to find people with a lot of seniority, a lot of experience who have the humility and willing to put the company first. So probably the biggest thing we look for in managers.
I in our conversation earlier today, Ryan, something that really stood out to me, actually that all three of you mentioned when I had the chance to chat with you earlier, is managers who are willing to let go of great talent and not hoard it, whether they're exporting it out into the company or even saying you belong leaving the company. But that's really having managers who are humble enough to step out of the way so that those high performers can go where they need to go. Kirsten, it looks like you wanted to say something. Yeah, maybe.
I think the other thing I would say, it's the ability to both give and receive feedback. So I think one of the things, and it's related to humility, but it's really important to get feedback from your employees too, to help you be the best manager you can to them. I'll use me as an example. We did a feedback experiment last week, and one of my directs gave me feedback on some stuff I was doing that wasn't so constructive. It was very constructive feedback, but wasn't so helpful to her. And I was like, oh, what is that? So we went out for coffee and then she explained it. And I was like, do I do that? And then I went back to the office and I do it 50 times a day. And I hadn't noticed. And it was a really good moment because she saw that I was willing to take the feedback every day since the last week. I'm like, oh, I did it again. I do it all the time. And what it is I yell across the room. I'm like, hey, grab me, what's this or whatever. I just make too much noise. So, and she finds it disruptive and it's fair. And I do it much more than I thought. But I hope for her over time, she learned that I took it on. And I'm really oh, wow, I do it much more than I ever thought I did. And I can actually see a point of view on how disruptive it is. I'm using Slack more. I used to do both Slack and email and Yell. So not so helpful, but anyway, so I think make sure you get people that take the feedback too.
Great. So managers who are being receptive, eliciting the feedback, and then upgrading their behavior. So another question that you sent in that I think is a great one. How do you handle the compensation side of retaining top employees or top performers, especially if your hands are tied and that employee is being offered higher comp elsewhere? So anything you want to say?
Yeah, sure. I think it comes down to one of the biggest myths of retention, that it's all about title and comp. It really, really isn't. It's about ownership. It's about growth. And if an employee is optimizing purely for compensation, maybe it's not the best fit for your culture anyways, right? I feel like we found, I don't know, as a startup, right, there's few times where we're able to beat out on comp, right? We're selling something much greater than comp. We're selling the mission-driven culture. We're selling the people at the end of the day. And you really just have to focus on those aspects of it. And it's going to be hard to win on comp against the Googles and Facebooks of the world.
True that. I would say also once you're in that trying to counter offer, the person's no longer in the game in some way, like the real game.
Totally.
Anything Kirsten and Julie you want to add?
Yeah, on the whole, I don't love counter offers. So just as a philosophy, that said, sometimes I would maybe do it. I think for me, it's about what is the business need? How did they approach it? Are they right? Looking at data, is there actually some anomaly? I've set up tons of structure now at our company. I don't think there should be, but it's always worth double checking. And has there been a market shift? So we pull market data just to make sure. And in engineering, some years, for instance, the market actually shifts pretty quickly, and it can be quite a sizable difference. But then I would say, as a leader, I'd want to make the shift for the whole team, not just for one individual, if it is a market shift. Because you should deal with that, or say to them, look, we'll make it when we do our market shift sort of view cut of the world. But yeah, on the whole, I don't like it either, and I totally don't think it's all comp, but comp's real for people. Like, you have to pay rent, you've got school loans, you want to upgrade, your friends are going to the Bahamas, you want to go. So anyway.
Yeah. So maybe it's not the thing, but you have to at least be in the range of competitive. And if you're not attuned to what is competitive, you might miss the boat with some great people. Okay. So now we have a question about how do you deal with trade-offs? For example, what's the best process for managing high performers that want to be people leaders, but either they're not a fit for being a people leader, or maybe there's not a people leadership opportunity? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's creating a strong IC track. So, they could be leaders and influencers in the company, even if they're not managing people directly. And, you can get creative with titles, but, it's things like, senior roles, leads, that, from engineering, for example, having both a management track as well as a strong IC track, where they become a senior engineer, staff engineer, a principal engineer, and the salary bands are actually similar, right, as managers, and making sure people realize that that management is not the only way for growth.
So we have a really related question. So for Kirsten and Julie, you can either answer that last question about management, or a related question, which is when you have two people going for the same promotion and one's going to get it and the other one's going to feel defeated, how do you make sure that you keep those engaged? So in either case, how do you deal with it when you have a high performer who's going for X, but you can't give them exactly X?
I'll answer the other one. It's easier. So I think, for me, when I think about the manager track or people wanting it, I do think there's projects you can give people. So for example, at my company, somebody wants to just develop on, say a management skill, and you could get them to mentor somebody more junior who just joined the org. They could be a buddy for somebody, because there's other ways to sort of hone those management skills before you actually become a manager. And actually, I think it makes you a better manager when you become a manager. So I think developing some programs, or a program sounds too formal, but just some being open to doing those sorts of things for people is super helpful. And I also agree, sometimes I think it's also okay to say we don't have that and I can't see that in this team for the next couple of years, and being honest, because that's where I think actually as a great manager, sometimes it's okay to leave a company. And you'd rather then set them up well and help them find the next company that will be great for their skills and allow them to do it, if in reality you're not going to. And sometimes you just don't know if you're not going to, in which I would say just be honest about that too, because then you can have a frank conversation around, I just don't know, I hope we will, whatever.
Right. Nobody wants the BS answer that's not coming true. It undermines trust. So Julie.
I would say having a very thoughtful conversation about motivation is really important in these kind of circumstances, right? So you want to be a people manager. This happens a lot. I want to be a manager. Why is that? What do you think a role of manager is, right? What are the responsibilities? Why do you think it'd be a good fit for a manager? A lot of times people think management, I think Ryan alluded to this, is like the only way to grow their careers, which is 100% not true. And quite frankly, a lot of people, when they're in that role, they said, I don't really want to be doing this, right? I just want to focus on my work, do a great job, and like, that's it. I don't want to be coaching people, like, don't tell me about your issues, all that kind of stuff, right? So really think about, what does that mean? Let's have a conversation. Let me tell you a little bit more about, let's get what you think, and then let's talk about, what the responsibilities are and what that looks like. On the other hand of, you have a role that two people are going after. If both people are really, truly high performers that you value, you definitely want to be able to have a good constructive feedback conversation with the person who didn't get the role. Because what you don't want to happen is like, you were so close, but like next time, that's not that helpful, right? It's understanding, okay, where are the areas that you can continue to develop in, and then talking about some sort of career roadmap for that individual as well. So, right, it's not the end of the road for you. Like, here are the things that I think you can really build on over the next 6 to 12 months. And once that happens, feels like you'll be much more prepared for this role. So it's just one-on-one conversations and being able to get the true motivation out from people that makes it a lot easier to think about, okay, what is really your ideal career path within the company? So I think that would be super helpful and important in those situations.
Yeah, and I hear among what all of you are saying that keeping people challenged and knowing what will have them challenged, it's not binary. It's not like this one role, but understanding their motivation and then having the agility as an organization and the manager pool that's leading that person, or which manager is leading them, having the agility to say, okay, I understand it. So now let's figure out something that's going to create that opportunity. All right, I like this juicy question here. Hold on, let me see where it went. I think it disappeared. Yep, here it is. What do you do if your poorly performing manager is a co-founder or someone high up in the organization? Who wants to go there?
Take it.
Great.
Hopefully this isn't me one day. I think it's all about having data and metrics to track people's work and goals and making sure everything's objective as possible. And it's not, just a group think that all of a sudden they don't like this person anymore, but there's just clear data and expectations that haven't been met over time. And then as a co-founder of the company or as a senior person in the company, they have a vested interest in the company succeeding. They're going to look at the data and understand, maybe there's someone else better for this job. And so as long as you have data for that conversation, it's a conversation that is possible for sure.
Love that. Anything either of you want to add to that?
Maybe this is a good discussion for the board. I'm assuming that every company has a board of directors, and this is something where you may want to seek, depending on the size of the company, how accessible they are, et cetera. It may be a good question, honestly. And I know for Namely, we have a very open board and they're very, very receptive. So if you do have a board of directors and you feel like there's something that could potentially be driving the company in the wrong direction, those may be individuals that could help, because this is a pretty serious question, quite frankly, if you feel like your co-founder is leading you down the wrong path, right? So, and this is obviously the opposite of what we're talking about today, but it may not be the company for you if you feel like nothing's going to change. So if you're really thinking about retention, you also have to think about yourself, right? Like, are you fighting a battle that you're not going to be able to be won by an HR person, right? Do you really think that you have the right leadership team in place to help build that company? And if not, that's something to be reevaluated as well.
Yeah, what I really like about this question and why I thought it was such a juicy good one is it speaks to things that all three of you have mentioned, like having the hard conversations and being willing to not step over things, or you spoke about favoritism or who's on the in gang, and that when those things that seem challenging to address get stepped over, all the other efforts we're putting in to create this high retention environment are like the hole in the bucket, right? Did you have something, Kirsten, that you wanted to? No. Okay, great. So how do you manage retaining new hires who are high performers while they're working with legacy employees who may not have the best attitude? So culture gaps between the old and the new.
So I think one of the things I would say is if employees have been there a while and they're not performing, then that's incumbent on the manager, the team actually, and HR to be dealing with. I don't think it's incumbent on a new hire to be dealing with that. So if a new hire happens to tell you and say, hey, and sheds a light on it, then it's our obligation, I think, to look into it and see if that is indeed happening and then act on it. You can't just leave it. And it is hard when somebody's invested so much of their time and love into a company. That is really, really tough to maybe say, hey, this isn't right anymore. Sometimes it actually can be a gift to the person, because sometimes you tend to know yourself. Like, how many of you have had times in your career where you feel like, I'm not performing? I'll put up my hand. And you know it when you're not. Like, even if people aren't telling you, you kind of know it yourself. Yeah. And so sometimes I think it can be a gift, and certainly in my job over the years, sometimes people, they don't always thank you in the moment, but sometimes later they're like, that was the best thing. Like, I went somewhere else and I did so much more because I could take what I've learned and apply it somewhere else. So I think sometimes we think of these hard conversations as negative. They can end up being a net positive of somebody's life if you handle them with respect. with candor and with empathy, because leaving a job is hard, and certainly being told to leave a job is even harder. It's one of the most stressful things a person can face. And so I think recognizing all of that when you're dealing with somebody is really important.
One thing to add here is around just communications from, I think, the leadership team on the vision and the future of the company, right? So this is one area where I feel like maybe could be a disconnect in what people are expecting and what people are expecting the company to be right now and where the company could be in the future, right? So really understanding, either doing at all hands, team meetings, et cetera, whatever it is, that everyone's unified on what we're all here to do. I think that's super important. And if there's something you could do that is a unified kind of platform, whatever it is, to get people together to really drive the mission together and to share that vision. I think that's really important, because I feel like maybe this question is stemming from some sort of, the company might be growing really fast, might be going in a different direction. So people are feeling not so good about it. Some other people are feeling great about it. So, but not a lot of clarity on exactly what the organization is right now and where it's going. So that to me is something that the leadership team really needs to take on.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, because I think as the company grows, you're always trying to hire people better than you, right? You're always trying to up-level your standards and caliber. And so, it may not be that there's like a stark difference, like a major difference in the high performers and the lower performers, but just your caliber and your recruiting constraints are increasing over time. And I think it's all about, how do those, legacy employees react, and how do they work with the new employees? Are they learning from them? Do they understand what they don't know, what this new employee does know? And are they helping them improve? Or are they kind of getting really defensive and getting really territorial? So you kind of have to see how it plays out a little bit.
And then be willing to let people go if that's really
Unfortunately, yeah,
the right thing for them. All right, so we're going to do one final question. All three of you want to hear your answers. So for each of you, 1 minute of advice. If people are going to do just one thing coming out of this panel, one piece of high leverage, actionable advice. Kirsten, let's start with you. We don't have to start with you.
I think, can I give two? I guess
Yeah,
I already said them in some
No,
ways,
no.
but the one is ask and really listen. So for your initial conversation with anyone that you're bringing on to your company, really listen and be open to the answers that they're giving you for the job that you have at hand and for where you want the company to go. Because I really do believe it's that sort of initial conversation that tells you so much that can help drive the future. But the other thing, if you're in a company already, it's setting up time in a forum to talk to your manager about what it is you really want to do. Do you want to be CEO? Do you want to be just where you are? You're quite fine, thank you. Whatever it is, because I think having those conversations will just lead to more happiness day to day, which ultimately I think helps retention. So those two things.
Yeah, I say, one of the most actual things you do is empowering, middle managers, junior managers, as they, empower their own employees, their own direct reports. And so giving them the structure, the tooling, the training that they need to have these hard conversations, especially managers who are early in their career, making sure that structure is in place so they can come, that someone joins a company as an early manager and they know exactly how you deal with these certain situations. And especially when you're talking about growth amongst a company, you're going to have a lot of ICs becoming managers. And when they become, our early managers in their career, making sure that they also have that structure in place. So focusing on middle management, junior managers, I would say is the most actionable.
I think I might go back to the data piece because I feel really passionate about it, as you can see. But look at your data. Do you run engagement surveys right now? If you don't, please start. Such a great way to get a pulse. We do them quarterly here, but at any sort of cadence is fine. Do you do exit interviews every time? Very, very really good way. Unfortunately, these people have already left, but also a good way. Sometimes that's when people are most honest, quite frankly, a good way to gauge how things are. So, do you track your attrition, your turnover metrics? If not, start looking into that. Cut it by department, cut it by manager, cut it by location, different job tiers, et cetera. Those are really good data points for you to start looking at to really understand what is going on in your organization and where are the areas you really need to be focused on. Both the parts are going super well, right? That's where you want to learn from. So it's not all about focusing on the negatives. What's going really, really well, and what are those areas you may want to address a little bit more. So I would say just go to the data. That is where you're going to find a lot of your answers.
Thank you. Each of you, you bring such a rich and distinct perspective. So thank you, all three of you. A few quick closing thoughts and then more food and drink. Oh yeah, Kirsten,
I was
you
going to
wanna
say we
some
should all
more?
work for Ryan by the sounds.
What's
Yeah.
that?
We should all work for Ryan by the sound since he's the CEO on the panel.
If you're ever out in San Francisco and you want a job, please.
All right. So a few big themes for this conversation about high retention and where it intersects with high performance. It's an expensive conversation, right? It's no soft thing, costs a lot, has a big impact on our businesses. So how do you find that intersection points? A few big themes I heard in today's conversation. Number one, know who you are as an organization and don't pretend you're something other than that just because great talent is sitting in front of you. And then listen for who they are and is it really a match, and be willing to tell the truth about those two things. Another thing I heard is the data and listening in a variety of ways, whether it's from pulse surveys or one-on-ones that managers are having. Be digging into what feedback do people have to say, whether it's about the culture at large or a person's own individual motivations and the kind of stretch assignments or ways they need to be unblocked so they're really thriving. But tap into listen versus just create one blanket experience. One really critical thing I also heard was managers, and equipping those managers to coach and know how to ask questions so they can hear what is motivating somebody, and then that those managers have the agility and ability to create stretch assignments or some kind of creative way, even if there's no specific role to slot somebody into, but ways that somebody can stretch and grow, and that those managers also are willing